guys, it's Chelsea from The Financial Diet, and I am coming to you guys hot from the TFD office, which is very exciting. We've never filmed here before. And I am joined by an extremely exciting guest, licensed therapist and fellow YouTuber, Kati Morton.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Tell us a little bit about you.
So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've been on YouTube now for 8 years.
That's 80 years.
It is.
In real time.
In YouTube years, yes. It feels like that also sometimes. But yeah, I've been on YouTube for 8 years, just answering any questions about mental health. I am an eating disorder and self-injury specialist. That's what I see in my practice. That's what I was trained in. But obviously nothing happens in a vacuum, so I answer all questions related to anything about mental health.
Do you like being a therapist?
I do. I really love it.
What's your favorite thing about it?
I think the fact that you get to watch people grow, it's like really rewarding and fulfilling in a strange way. A lot of people think that you see them only at their worst, which is true when they first come to see you, but then you get to work together to make it better, and that's really cool.
So we actually asked you guys on the TFD Instagram, which you should check out, link in the description, to send in your most pressing questions for Kati, and I also have a few of my own. So let's get right into it.
Let's go.
So the first question is one that I thought was really adorable that we got on Instagram, which was, can I hug my therapist?
I love this question. I actually get it on my channel a lot as well. So everybody wonders about it. And the short answer is yes. But there's a little caveat. You should talk to your therapist about it first, just so that there's an understanding of why. And I'll give you a little background really quick, is because attachment is something that's really important to address in therapy, meaning if I need to be around Chelsea all the time, every day, I need to call her all the time, I need to know where she is, that can be really unhealthy. That can be codependent. It can be an enmeshed type of relationship. And in therapy, we want to be very careful about boundaries and having separation so that you leave session and you try it out and you do your best. You're not dependent upon me. And so they'll want to have a conversation about why you want to hug. But yeah, of course you can.
How do I deal with the anxiety of an uncertain career future when we should have it figured out? / how do I deal with not being where I should be?
I loved this question when I read it, and I was like, so many people I'm sure can relate, because we feel like we have to have certain things happening at certain times, but you don't. And so I guess one of my favorite quotes is, comparison is the thief of joy. And that sounds like what's happening here, is that we're looking at other people and other timelines that have nothing to do with us, and we're accepting that as what should happen. You can start your career at 50. You can never purchase a home. You can never want to get married. There are a lot of things that you can do in your own time because it's your life and it's your own time. And so I think checking in with the conversation you're having with yourself is really what I would recommend you do. Notice how you're talking to yourself about where you're at in life and turn it into a more positive conversation. So don't allow your brain to like spiral into this anxious, I'm 30, I should know what I want to be, I should already be on my career path, I should have my 401k. I mean, you should have a 401k. Let's not get off topic of financial
You should
diet.
be hard on yourself if you don't have a 401k at 30. Or an IRA. IRA.
Okay, fair enough. But also, like, everybody to their own in their own time. Comparing to other people's only going to make you feel less than or not enough or not on the right path, and that's simply not true. So just check your thoughts and try to make them more positive and more accepting.
How do you avoid feeling envious / jealous of friends who are in a better financial position than you?
It's kind of similar. I picked this one because it's similar to the other question, where it kind of rolls off into it, where you need to pay attention to, well, first of all, who are your friends? And if those relationships are toxic or they're in any way, talking down to you, only inviting you to things that you can't afford, like, oh, I want to go on this big trip to, I don't know, Florida or New Orleans, I don't know, somewhere that's like, you have to fly and you have to get hotels and that's expensive. And you're like, I'm barely making ends meet. Have a conversation with them and hopefully they respect that, and we'll be like, hey, let's go to this art gallery. It's like free entrance and blah, blah, blah. We can have lunch, things that are more reasonable. So there's that conversation that needs to be had, but also I think it's also what you're saying to yourself and how you're talking to yourself about that situation, because money doesn't equate to happiness. And I think a lot of us think that, oh, when I'm making insert X number of dollars a year or a month, that then I'll feel better. You can feel better now. You don't have to wait. If we wait till something happens, till we make a certain amount of money, we'll never be happy. And so try to find ways to notice all of the wonderful things you have in your life now. pay attention to all the things to be grateful for, the relationships, the experiences, and yeah, I just try to focus on that. And again, if those relationships aren't healthy and they're like talking down to you and that's why you feel jealous, then that might need reassessing.
I also mute liberally on Instagram.
Oh, 100%. And it has nothing to do with them. It's all about me. Like, I don't need to compare the fact that I can't afford a $500 pair of shoes or a $1,200 jacket. Like, I don't need to see that. That's not in my lifestyle.
I have a couple people on my Instagram who are like always on vacation somehow.
Yeah.
Like, get a job.
Right?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I've muted those people.
That's fair.
Also, I will say for the financial element of it, it is very difficult to be friends with people who are in a radically different income bracket. Mm-hmm. It demands of that person whoever has a lot more money, it demands of them being a particularly good person.
Yes.
Very empathetic, very understanding, very generous, and very self-aware. A lot of people are not that. So if you feel like you have a hard time maintaining a friendship with someone who's radically outside of your scope, like, it's not really a you problem. That's just genuinely hard to do.
Yeah, because you have totally different views of the world. I mean, I wish it wasn't that way, but it is, because things that we think are ridiculous in cost to them is just an everyday spend. And they might think, oh, this restaurant's just nice and I like it. And you're like, but like it starts like $24 for like a salad and that's just not okay for me or whatever.
Totally.
But that's why having a conversation with them, because I do believe if we communicate clearly, they may be able to rise to the occasion and be more mindful. Or just they might even just say, hey, when we get together, why don't you just tell me where you want to go and what you want to do? And I know that puts a little pressure on you, but if the relationship's worth maintaining, then you'll put that effort in.
What are the financial costs of living with mental illness aside from medication?
There can be a lot of financial costs. I actually really like this question because not everyone talks about it, but there's like loss of wages. If we're hourly and we have a big depressive episode and we can't get out of bed, then we've lost that day's work. And that, I forget the numbers, I should have looked up the stats, but it's like billions of dollars a year of in the US alone are lost to mental illness and not being able to work. So there's that cost, but there's also the cost of therapy. And I think all therapists work on a sliding scale, meaning that even if my full rate, just for round numbers, let's say my full rate is $100 an hour. But if you're a student and you're having a tough time, I'll slide my hourly rate down to, let's say, $60 or $70 an hour and try to work with you. And so there's the cost of therapy. There is a cost of any other appointments you have to have. Like if you see a psychiatrist for psychotropic medications, such as an antidepressant or atypical antipsychotic, any kind of medication like that, you have to see a psychiatrist. So there's the cost of that, whether it's copays or the full amount. And there's also regular doctor's checkups. A lot of times, like I specialize in eating disorders, so my patients have to see a doctor regularly or a dietitian. So I think all of your treatment team, I call it, when we talk about like different doctors, therapists, dietitians, that's all your people that are helping you. There's the cost of them, and then also, like I said, the lost wages.
Is it okay to tell your therapist literally everything?
Yes, within reason. And I don't say this to say like hide things or keep secrets, but that we are legally mandated reporters for certain situations. Meaning if you're under 18 and you're being abused in any way, meaning emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, I have to report that.
To the authorities?
In California, where I'm licensed, is Child Protective Services, but you'll have your version in your country or state. I also have to report if you're an elder, meaning if you're over 65, if you're being abused in any way, I have to report that as well. Or if you're a dependent adult, meaning I can't take care of my basic needs, someone else does that for me for whatever reason, whether it's like physically dependent, maybe we have some kind of disability in our brain development. Those would be reasons that you'd be a dependent adult. I'll have to report abuse as well. And then also if you're a child under the age of 18, this sounds really silly to say it this way, but used to call it drugs, sex, and rock and roll, that I'd have to tell your parents. I'm not going to tell your parents everything, and I'll have a discussion with you, but if I think you're doing illegal drugs, I'll have to tell them.
God, Katie, you're a narc.
I know, I'm such a narc. Or if I think you're having like unsafe sexual practices, having sex when you're a teen is fine and healthy and part of development for many people, but if I feel like it's in any way dangerous for you, and then we say rock and roll, so if I think you're like, I don't know, roaming the streets, throwing rocks at people's houses and just being like an angry, chaotic teen.
Literally rock and roll.
totally rock and roll. And then I might have to tell them as well. But other than that, you should tell your therapist that, like, therapists need to know everything so that we can help you. And the less we know, the less information we'll have to give you the right advice or guidance.
How do you deal with a family member that has mental illness?
First of all, take care of yourself. We can't help someone else if we don't help ourselves first. I know people hate that answer, but that's the truth. If I'm not taking care of myself, I can't show up for you and do a good job filming and answering questions. If I'm not taking care of myself, I can't help anybody else, like pouring from a pitcher that isn't filled with water. There's nothing there to give. So keep that in mind. And then the best way to assist someone in your life in general, friends, family, anyone, check in on them. Offer to assist in any real tangible way. Maybe it's like, you want to go to therapy, but you're scared. I can go and wait in the waiting room with you, or I can help you, I can make a call, like I can help you find a list of therapists in your area so that you know who to call or email or whatever, or help you put together that email or what you want to say. And I could maybe help pay the copay, or there are certain logistical ways we can assist, but we can't make anyone get better. And I know that that's really hard for family and friends to hear, but they have to do the work. Even as a therapist, it's hard on the daily because I can't work harder than my patients, because at the end, I can't do what they need to do in their real life. I have to offer the resources and tips and hope that they use that information. So just keep that in mind. You can't make them get better, but you can be supportive, you can check in on them, and you can assist in any logistical way possible.
What is an effective way, in your opinion, if you have someone in your life that you think should go to therapy but is very resistant to the idea? Have you found that there's anything that tends to be quite effective in maybe bridging that gap?
Yes and no. Again, they have to make the decision themselves. So even though this has worked for some of my patients, it's mainly my patients' parents, I'll be honest, who are like, oh, I don't want to go to therapy. Like, that means I'm crazy.
What is with boomers in therapy?
I don't know.
Every boomer should be in therapy.
100%. They shouldn't even have two therapists.
Honestly, I feel like every straight man, first of all, like, had a raw
totally
diet of toxic masculinity. But every boomer, especially, every boomer man, oh my God.
Yeah, and it's a certain generation. Think about like how things have shifted even since I've been on YouTube for 8 years. The conversation about mental health has transitioned into a much more like, yeah, of course I have a therapist. Everybody should have a therapist. From back in the day when I first started on YouTube, they were like, what are you doing on here? Like, talking about this? Like, that's a
totally.
So it's definitely shifted. But if it's the best thing you can do, if it's like a parent or someone in your life, to try to encourage that, is to talk about how it's been helpful for you.
When does I'm depressed and don't want to talk to anyone become just being a bad friend?
I think the moment we stop actually communicating with them and just not responding, like ghosting or isolating, is when it becomes a bad friend. But I think that if they are a friend worth having, it's worth having that conversation where you say, hey, I've just been feeling really down, and so you might not hear from me for a while. Don't think that I don't want to see you or I don't care about you, but I just need a little bit. And it'd also be great for you to reach out and remind me that you're there. You know, we have to be able to express our needs and also our situation, what we're going through, to those in our life. Otherwise, those aren't real relationships. You're not communicating. And so that's what I would keep in mind, because we can all go through these huge bouts of depression or anxiety or just busyness. And I think if people are really important and we want to spend time with them, let them know.
So I recently did a video about like self-care rhetoric, which I feel like
I hate self-care talk.
Same.
It costs so much money. I have to go buy things. Whoa.
And it's so much about immediate gratification, which I find is often the opposite of self-care.
Well, you get this huge reward system spike in your brain, and then followed by deep down.
Well, and I feel like also a lot of times what you'll see in the self-care discourse is people talking about like, listen, if you need to like not call anyone back, or like don't show up to things, or, you know, whatever, like that's your right.
Like totally isolate. And you're like, no.
And you're like, no, but also like your poor friends have needs too. Like at the very least, you know, send an email or a text and be like, hey, I'm really down right now, but I still care about you, or whatever. Like take that 5 minutes, because it's hard for the people on the other end.
Well, and you can't just not show up for people. That's why communication's key. And relationships are give and take too. If every time we're with our friends, we're just complaining about our own situation and talking about ourselves and not giving time to their issues, to say like, hey, enough about me. What's going on with you? Like if we're not able to do that, that's what a therapist is for. You don't have to ask us how we're doing. So that would be, I think, if you find yourself slipping into that like bad friend role, like per that question, see somebody.
How has your career on YouTube changed since Shane Dawson's Jake Paul series?
I knew I'd get a question about this, and so I was like, let's just do it. We'll just answer it. Honestly, it really hasn't changed. It grew the channel a lot, and it brought a lot of new people to my channel.
For those who don't know, could you explain what that was?
Yeah, so Shane Dawson, if you don't know, he's a very large YouTuber. He has a great, huge following, and he does these kind of docu-series videos. And I was part of a couple of them. I was part of, the biggest one was him when he was looking to see if Jake Paul was a sociopath. So he wanted me to explain what antisocial personality disorder was. And I definitely got some backlash I wasn't expecting. But I think people were mad that some phrasing that I use, because like people with antisocial personality disorder don't have empathy for others. And I describe that as being like icky or kind of feeling gross when you're in relationships with people like that don't care about how you feel. That can feel very odd. And people found that offensive, which everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but you don't have to shout at others online. So there's that. And then I was part of the Eugene Yacuni short series he did, because eating disorders are my specialty, and he wanted to know what to say and not say since she was coming out of treatment. And both of those, honestly, were very helpful for the channel. I think everybody has a mental health. If I can be a resource to anyone who's hurting, that's been great. And Shane's a great friend. And I think that overall, we both were surprised by any of the backlash from the Jake Paul series, but it was a Jake Paul series, we should have known. But I think honestly, it was really, really great. But it hasn't changed who I am or what I do. I still just do what I've always been doing.
So I actually have a few questions of my own. One of the things that we hear most from our readers as far as their mental health difficulties with regards to money, well, we have a couple. The first one, though, being emotional spending or stress spending. Do you have any really practical tips for people, especially like if they're in the moment or they have specific triggers to like how to get away from that habit?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about it in a video on my channel, so go check that out as well, like in a fuller way. But I think the first thing to know about emotional spending is your triggers. So the last time you overspent or the last time you did something, we can use that information to like track back and figure out what caused it. Because we usually have a button. There's one main thing that will cause us to impulsively or emotionally spend. That could be a fight with a loved one. That could be feeling like I need to be rewarded. There's a lot of different reasons, but we need to figure out what is that. Because then, and the next big step is coming up with other ways to cope with that feeling. Because the reason that we go to emotional spending is because buying something that we really like does trigger the reward center in our brain. So we get all those feel good, like dopamine hits. We're like, ooh, I'm on top of the world, followed by a very steep decline where we go back to reality and we're like, oh, how am I gonna pay for that? And that's where like buyer's remorse comes in. And so there's a reason that we're seeking that dopamine hit. And if there's other ways we can get us to feel better, maybe that's like, I go for a walk with my dog, or I talk to a friend, or I journal about what happened. So I'm like getting it out. So I feel like it's not just caught in a loop in my head. There are a lot of different things we can do. And then with my patients, I always say, once you've done, let's say 2 to 3 coping skills, like I've called Chelsea, I've talked to my mom, I went for a walk, I petted a dog, I took a bath maybe or something, then wait 30 minutes and then free reign to do whatever. But at least try those things first, because we have to slow down that like impulse to buy.
Totally. One thing that I find really works for me is when because I love home decor, it's like my hobby. And I often find myself like, that's where I'm most inclined to spend online, because unlike clothes where I'm like, I want to try this thing on.
Yeah.
With items for your home, you feel much more empowered
to like measure,
online.
look at the color.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what I like to do is make inspiration boards, because it takes a lot of time, which just distracts you.
It's a distraction.
But also it's like half of what you just want to do is just like imagine and think about it and be creative for a minute. And I often find that it will really take that impulse away from me and make the ultimate purchase a smarter one.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice.
Okay, this is a petty question. Do therapists know when you're lying?
For the most part.
Just asking all these manic questions.
And for the most part, I've had patients who lied to me a lot.
And did you know?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, it kind of depends on the thing, right? Like if there's a few ways that we figure out if we're being lied to. Like if I'm suspicious, I'll always be like, hey, so how about we bring your spouse in or your mom in for like a session? Because if there's issues going on at home where I feel like we're not making progress, I'm curious as to why.
Right.
Or if you say you're making progress, but it's not quite equating to what I'm seeing in my office, I'm curious why. Because oddly enough, people usually lie about their progress. That's the most common, I find. Obviously, people will omit information, like I'm not ready to talk about the abuse that I sustained as a child. I'm just not there yet. Or I don't really want to get into the fact that I want my therapist to like me and feel good about the things that I say, like I'm doing well. And
it's important that I'm my therapist's favorite.
A lot of people feel that way, but those are like, healthy. That's a whole different thing, but you're omitting, you're not lying, right?
Right, yeah.
And not that you can't lie by omission, we won't get into the minutia of that. Right. But usually it's about progress and it's about things that you did or didn't do. And if it doesn't line up with other information, because we ask a lot of questions, it gets really hard to keep lying. And so usually I'll bring in another member from their life for just part of the session, and I'll ask a bunch of questions about things. And that's how I'll learn, like, maybe you are really like not going to bed till 3 a.m. and waking up at 2, but you've been telling me that you're like moving it closer to a regular time and you're not.
Right.
Things like that. So sometimes yes and sometimes no, but really the line only does a disservice to you.
It's true. So another thing that we hear about all the time as far as people's like big money mental health things is insecurity with regards to their past. I grew up when I was a kid, we were quite poor, and for a long time was very insecure about that, and that drove me to make a lot of reckless financial decisions. I feel completely like at peace with that whole thing, but a lot of people I think aren't and don't feel empowered at all to talk about money or to talk about their past, especially whether it's how they grew up or mistakes that they made. What are some ways that people can start to make peace with their financial past?
I think a lot of it is just processing it, because I think for many of us, it just happens and then we're like, oh, forget about it, just shove it in a hole. And that could mean debt that we've never paid back. And that could mean a credit score that follows us for a while until we've healed that, which I think that might be why money is such a difficult thing to move past, because even if we mentally have processed it, the ramifications of our credit score or debt could still be following us. Yep. And so I think, and there's a lot of shame with debt. So I think the best thing that you can do is to start talking about it. And that could be with a therapist, that could be with a debt consolidator, that could be with friends. I think depending on how your relationship is with certain friends, having someone that you can talk honestly about spending with could be really healing. We might not have that person in our life, and I think that's where therapy really comes in, because the interesting thing about money is its direct correlation with mental health. Like I said, I specialize in eating disorders, and my patients who are restricted with food are restricted with money. And my patients who binge on food, binge on spending. And so there's this, like, I can see it almost, I'd almost say 100% of the time, but let's just say 90% just for, there's always those anomalies where we'll have that happen. And so the more we can talk about it, the more we can understand why we did that. That always helps me, even in therapy, if I'm like, hey, like I burned that relationship down. Like I was angry and I was pissed and like, I wanted to get rid of it. Why did I react so intensely to that? And if I can understand like where that came from, like, oh, there was this time in my childhood when this always happened and that was like the pattern. And so that's, I know I'm getting like really into it, but I feel that if we could figure out the root of the cause for that spending, like I grew up very poor. I grew up pretty poor as well. So having money, we can either have this like scarcity where we're like, oh no, don't spend any of it, and we can't enjoy, or we don't know how to manage it and we spend, and then we're like, crap, now I'm in a big heap of debt and trouble. So understanding where that comes from can really be healing, because I think it takes not the onus off of us, but it kind of sheds a little light on that, helps us be a little more vulnerable to that instead of just hiding in the shame of it. We're like, oh no, there was a reason. Like I did this because of that and I didn't really understand. And there can be more compassion. From understanding, I think, is where the compassion comes from.
Well, this has been extremely illuminating and so exciting. And good news for all of us is that she's coming back soon to answer more questions. So where can our viewers find you if they want more?
Yeah, my channel name is just Kati Morton, Katimorton, and across all socials, I put out a video every Monday.
And I will be actually on her channel very soon talking about emotional spending and some other money and mental health topics, so you can check me out over there. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Do not forget to subscribe and to come back every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday for new and awesome videos. Bye.